It's been called the most expensive drug in the world, Soliris, eculizumab, powerful liquid that can mean the difference between life and death, at a cost of $500,000 a year, every year for life.
This drug is life-altering.
This drug is too expensive, but still I hope many more people can use it.
This drug is highly overpriced.
This drug has a potential to save my life.
This drug is forcing us to rethink how we say yes and how we say no when it comes to prescription drugs.
If it helps me, that's all that matters.
These days, Josh DiBertoli is back to being a healthy 13-year-old. Thanks to the liquid gold that's infused into his veins every 2 weeks. Josh suffers from a rare blood disease. He didn't know he had it until 3 years ago, when he suddenly got sick.
He was in a state where his tongue was hanging out of his mouth and he couldn't hold up his head, and it was just terrifying. It was, you know, it's every parent's worst nightmare.
I was in the hospital for like a month and a half, so.
But then doctors gave him a new drug, Soliris. It worked immediately.
And how do you feel these days?
Normal.
How does normal feel?
I don't know how to explain it. Just doing the things that I did before.
So what kinds of things are those?
Playing outside with my friends, going back to school, yeah.
It wasn't until later that his mother learned how much it cost.
Holy hell on earth, that's expensive. $500,000 a year is expensive to anyone.
So far, Soliris is approved to treat 2 ultra-rare diseases that affect just 1 or 2 out of every 1,000,000 people. Paroxysmal nocturnal hemoglobinuria, or PNH, and atypical hemolytic uremic syndrome, or aHUS. In both cases, the immune system starts attacking and destroying red blood cells, causing anemia, blood clots, organ failure, and eventually death. Soliris is not a cure, but it can stop the assault on the body's tissues and organs, and patients can go back to leading normal lives. All it takes is an infusion every other week or so.
Can you feel it going in? Does it feel funny in your hand?
No, doesn't feel like anything, just when you get the needle.
Yeah.
It's just like any other needle, but.
Josh DiBertoli gets 4 of these little bottles every time. Together, they add up to about $28,000 every 2 weeks. That's around $54,000 every month. And even though Soliris is keeping Josh alive, the DiBertoli family can't afford $648,000 every year for the rest of his life.
And I know my family was very worried.
So, when he first got sick, they went public with their story to pressure the Ontario government to pay for the drug.
I thought that I might die.
Was it scary talking in the media and being on the news?
No, now at this point I'm kind of used to it.
We're trying to...
At first, they didn't know how to run a media campaign.
I've never done anything like this. So they kind of walk you through it and they tell you this is what's going to happen, somebody's going to come, there's going to be lights, camera.
They were professional media handlers.
Originally, we had like a little PR company that was helping us get out there because we were clueless. I have no idea how to do any of this. They were hired by Alexion, actually, for us.
That's Alexion Pharmaceuticals, the company that makes Soliris.
Did you make the call to the TV station?
No, they did all of that initially.
It turns out she's not the only one to get that kind of help. The drug company funds patient lobby groups all over the world, helping patients become activists.
I have atypical uremic syndrome.
Drug helps patients with a rare kidney disease, but can the NHS afford it?
It would mean so much to me to live a normal life.
They take their stories to the media as a way of pressuring their governments to pay for Soliris.
I'm scared that I won't get to retire. I won't see the kids grow up, get married.
I can't believe that they're putting a price on one of their citizens' lives.
And those news stories are very powerful because typically they involve patients with very serious conditions and they pull at your heartstrings, and I feel horrible whenever I see one of them.
UBC health economist Michael Law says the media campaigns work, and the drug companies know this.
And if you can ramp up the pressure in a way that that makes people squirm and makes people uncomfortable, then chances are you'll get listed, because it's hard for politicians to ignore those compelling stories that end up on the nightly news.
But it's a media strategy that went off the rails in one country. We traveled to Belgium to find out how the drug company's tactics became a national story. His name is Victor, and he had a heart-wrenching tale.
It all started here on this quiet street just outside Brussels when Victor's parents received some terrible news.
Their normally lively 7-year-old was in danger of dying from a disease they'd never heard of.
And then we go to the hospital, and then they say us that it was Aarhus. He was on intensive care for 1 week.
Victor was in crisis. The only hope was Soliris.
It was very expensive, but it was the only thing that can help him. And then he received the medicament, and after 1 day his situation was very better.
The family was counting on the Belgian government to pay for the drug, but the government was balking at the price. In the back rooms of the Belgian parliament, they were negotiating with Alexion to get a better price. It wasn't going well. Anne Hendricks was at the table as an advisor to the health minister.
We really thought that we would never reach an agreement.
Word leaked out that the negotiations were failing. Victor's father panicked, got some advice, and called the media.
Victor moet om de 2 weken naar het UZ in Jette.
Suddenly, Victor's face was in the news.
I think it's the first time anybody heard €500,000 a year, and it was very closely associated to a child, to a child that would die if he didn't have the drug. So it was very emotional.
The country was captivated. Journalist Maxie Eckert was assigned to cover what she thought was a story about a family's desperate struggle to save their child. But she discovered a lot more than that when she started digging.
It was not a human interest story, it was a campaign for having pressure on the minister.
What she filed was a bombshell. A PR firm hired by the drug company had helped Victor's parents with their media campaign.
This representative contacted the parents and had some tips for them. So he helped them who to contact in the media, what to say, what to emphasize, and so on. So, yeah, and of course they thought that it was help. It was clear that it was the PR company and the pharmaceutical company behind that.
When the story hit the newspapers, the Belgians could hardly believe what they were reading. They felt manipulated, and they were furious.
Victor's parents admitted to Belgian reporters that they had talked to a man from a PR company, but they didn't know Alexion was involved.
Wij wisten niet dat hij door Alexion ergens tussen zat. Dus dat wil ik zeker en vast duidelijk stellen. Wij waren daar niet van op de hoogte.
And I do believe them because for your child you do everything. But yeah, but they were quite shocked that they were playing within a game that they didn't recognize.
Today they remember the stress of all that.
Oh, that's a long story. That was a roller coaster for us.
But the media campaign was effective. The Belgian government gave into the pressure and covered the drug.
Did it work?
Yes. Yes. Every people talks about.
Yes.
Also, the politician talks about it, and then you have a reaction.
In the city of Ghent, outside Brussels, a professor of ethics and medicine at the university watched the story unfold. Ignace Devic.
It's a sort of emotional abuse of people. And of course, you can agree with the parents like they're satisfied right now because their kid is being helped by it. But if you look at the broader perspective, I think you can never well, give a sort of round of applause for that.
It's totally unfair that the amount of budget of your country will decide whether you have access or not.
The Belgian controversy still continues. A new Minister of Health is trying to renegotiate the Soliris deal. As for Victor, he's now a healthy boy with a normal life expectancy. All of these stories have a common theme: patients fighting their governments to pay for a $500,000 drug. But what the patients don't seem to do is challenge the drug company to lower the price.
One of the reasons I think you don't see a lot of pressure back on the companies as well is that a lot of the patient groups in this field are funded by the companies. And so if the patient groups were to complain too loudly, I think it would be like baiting the hand that feeds you.
What about asking the drug company to lower the price?
That's not my job. That's the government's job.
Still to come, the true price of Soliris. Soliris presents a kind of chemical paradox. Its life-saving liquid is transparent, but the reasons for its high price are opaque, shrouded by corporate confidentiality, and governments have no power to force the drug companies to open their files and disclose their true costs. But based on what Alexion has publicly disclosed about the money spent on research and development to get Soliris on the market, it's clear that the price far exceeds the cost of developing the drug. For one thing, most of the discoveries behind Soliris were made by university researchers using public money.
I think the public science is well over 80 or 90% of the work. I think that's not in dispute. Public resources went into understanding the molecular basis of the disease. Public resources went into developing the technology to make antibodies. And then finally, Alexion, to their credit, kind of picked up the pieces.
Sashdev Sidhu understands the business of drug development. He used to do research for a major US biotech company. Now he started his own company that's developing drugs like Soliris. He says the drugs are much less expensive to manufacture than people think.
And we know roughly what that costs, and it's far, far, far less than the cost of the drug. It probably costs less than 1% of the price of the drug to make the drugs.
The retail price tag on a single bottle? About $6,700. The estimated cost to manufacture the antibodies inside? About $60.
I think it is important to know that basic price, because then you can start having a dialogue, right? And asking companies to justify what in addition beyond the basic price. And I think that's never really happened in drug development, which is very odd considering how central it is, much more so than even other things we consume.
Soliris is Alexion's only drug, with revenues of more than $6 billion in just 8 years, making it one of the fastest growing companies in the world. We asked Alexion for an interview. The company refused. But in a short statement, it said pricing requires a unique decision-making framework that takes into account the severity and the rarity of the illness, the absence of alternative treatments, and the social and medical costs of people being sick. In other words, Soliris works. People get better. Essentially, the company sets the price at what it thinks it can get.
This diagnosis was going to change my life.
And one of the most effective tools they have are patient stories.
I felt like the disease was taking me and I didn't have control.
I wasn't feeling very well.
I felt run down a lot.
For Alexion, using patient testimonials is one of the most persuasive tools to convince governments to agree to pay. Yet many patients still can't get the drug. In Brampton, Ontario, Michael Eigenram is one of the unlucky ones. He plugs himself into a dialysis machine almost every night. In Canada, some provinces will cover the costs of Soliris for some patients based on certain special criteria. But he doesn't qualify because dialysis is keeping him alive.
From what I've seen of the criteria, it doesn't look promising. I've heard that the government say that we're trying to just fund it for the most critical cases where patients are, on death's bed, or whether, their kidneys are failing or other organs are failing immediately. that might save their organs. In those situations, they'd fund it, but not to bring other patients like myself back to health.
As head of the Canadian patient group, he's fighting for total access for every patient, with a little help from Alexion.
Our patient group receives some funding from Alexion. I do feel a little bit caught in a triangle, but I understand a lot of the positions better now that I've been looking into it more. They need to pay the bills and keep their doors open, so I understand that. I understand that governments want to keep costs down, but I also, as a patient, think that patients deserve to have proper treatment if it's available.
The healing properties of Soliris are not in dispute, but its promise is overshadowed by the cost. And every country pays a different price. Alexion negotiates a separate deal with every government. The strategy is deliberate, and secrecy is paramount.
So the companies have done a very good job of setting up a system where they can negotiate individually with each place. And if you want the deal, then you keep the price secret.
According to a federal watchdog, Canada pays the highest price in the world, about $700,000 per person per year. Now, the Patent and Medicine Prices Review Board is fighting back, accusing Alexion of overcharging and demanding some money back.
And so as more and more of these expensive drugs like Soliris come along, and those stories end up in the newspaper, we're going to have a bit of a reckoning, I think, in terms of how we make those decisions. And frankly, we're going to have to making those decisions because it's not going to be possible for us to say yes all the time.
Josh DiBertoli doesn't have to worry about any of that right now. He's among the lucky few who are getting Soliris free, at least for now.
Now you have to shoot from there.
He still receives it compassionately from Alexion. We understand that it's a business, and we understand that he's receiving a $500,000 drug every year, or whatever the cost of it is. And we're grateful, but realistically, we know that at some point that's going to come to an end.
I imagine being a father of a child suffering from that disease, and I don't have that amount of money. What will you do? Will you sell your house? I mean, it's beyond every kind of ethics I can imagine.
I don't know how you tell people, yes, we know that there's a drug here, and we know that it's effective, we're just not going to give it to you. I don't know how you do that.
It's a difficult question that's going to be asked again and again. And with 7,000 orphan diseases awaiting treatment, it won't be long before the next most expensive drug in the world is on its way. Kelly Crow, CBC News, Toronto.